Virtual Legality is a YouTube video series with audio podcast versions presented as commentary and for education and entertainment purposes only. It does not constitute legal advice and does not create an attorney-client relationship. If you have legal questions about the topics discussed, please consult your own legal counsel. And this goes double if your name is Kyle Bosman or Michael Huber. On with the show. The case against Kyle Bosman and Michael Huber, E3 2019. Dateline, June 18th, 2019, Southern California. The Easy Allies E3 2019 Betting Special Results Show, exclamation included, is released on popular social media and outrage sharing site YouTube by California-based internet commenters and sometimes musical performers, the Easy Allies. The show, exclamation included, is headed jointly by rambunctious profligate betting and shotgun connoisseur Michael Huber and curmudgeon misanthrope hoodie fan Kyle Bosman. Ostensibly based around the even-handed determination of betting outcomes, arising out of June 6, 2019's The Easy Allies 2019 E3 Betting Special Total Degeneration, the show, exclamation included, turned out to be exactly that. Degenerate. Outrageous. Truly, truly, truly outrageous. Indeed, it turned into a gem of a case. The setup to the bet, like most stories of those tempted into degeneracy, was simple enough. Each member of the Easy Allies was given 500 Don Bucks to bet on the occurrence of certain things happening or not happening at 2019's Electronic Entertainment Exposition, or E3, held annually in the Allies' own backyard of Los Angeles, California. Was the proximity of the event enough to undermine the scruples of the Allies? To call into question the very morality of their acts? The reasons may well vary, and we may never know the true story of their decline. But either way, the City of Angels would prove less than angelic for Misters Huber and Bosman. The bet that would lead to their downfall? As simple as the setup of the event. Will Final Fantasy VII Remake announce a release date? Let's take a look at their discussion.
Sure enough about it.
Yeah.
Will Final Fantasy VII Remake announce a release date? 67.4% of our patrons said yes. I think they're right on that too.
This is a pretty good bet.
But I don't know. It could. Hubert, what do you think about like early 2020? That's what they're going to do,
count?
right?
Does
it
that
would not
count?
count. That's not
so
a release date.
you need a day.
Yes, and I have such a feeling they're going to say early 2020.
Yeah, it's kind of risky then.
Too risky.
Okay.
Simple enough. But what was simple enough to say would prove quite complex to unwind for these quote-unquote allies. Like all contracts, a bet can only be formed from a proper meeting of the minds, an agreement as to the parameters of the bet, and when such a bet will pay out or be forfeited to the house. To their credit, the Easy Allies did take steps to establish such parameters.
Today, we each get 500 Don Bucks. They are divided into 20 Don Buck bills. So we must bet on at least five. That's
Five
one of
bets,
the rules.
minimum.
You can't bet on both sides of a bet. That's just wrong. It's against the spirit of E3.
Yeah. It's like going to roulette, putting it on red and black.
Yes.
We're not doing it.
You could do it, not us.
Not us.
We have some honor. I think that's kind of it, dude. I don't know if there's any more rules than that.
There will be, but we don't know.
Okay, obviously you're right.
Classic.
We'll leave it up to the council if necessary.
Yes.
We did forget one rule. It did happen. We forgot about the press conference rule, which states that, unless stated otherwise, each of these bets pertains to the main press conferences, Square Enix, Bethesda, Microsoft, Ubisoft, and Nintendo. Just those five. We know there's others, but it's just, it gets messy, it gets sloppy if we include everything.
The press conference rule. A rule so important to the correct operation of their betting special that it was added in a clear pickup or reshoot and hastily added into their special so as to provide the proper contours for a true meeting of the minds, a true contractual bet. A rule that makes clear that without an express statement of a different timing requirement, all bets pertain to, and only to, the press conferences held by some of the major presenters making appearances at E3. A rule that would prove Mr. Huber's and Mr. Bosman's undoing. As is already likely clear, the bet, will Final Fantasy VII Remake announce a release date, was not written by legal or other counsel. In evaluating the language of such a bet, a number of areas of potential ambiguity were practically guaranteed to arise. What if the name of the game announced by Square Enix were Final Fantasy Remake Part 1? What if the release date announced were only a season or year? What if the announcement took place outside of the Square Enix press conference? Indeed, much of the betting special was spent addressing such inherent ambiguities in this and other bets. Fortunately for prospective bettors, the nature of announcement timing was expressly clarified for Mr. Michael Damiani, an easy ally himself, and published for the world to see and rely upon.
Right now, baby, will Final Fantasy VII Remake announce a release date? Not at E3. No.
Why are they having a press conference?
It'll happen at some other point, not at E3.
Okay. He knows something.
I think
No.
Are you thinking the concert, or are you thinking after E3?
Does the concert count?
It would not count.
Okay, then
concert
that
is not-
concert, baby.
Yeah.
That concert.
Not at E3. Not at E3. It will happen at some other point. Does the concert count? It would not count. Buoyed by and relying upon the words of his friend and so-called ally, on an express call for clarification, Mr. Damiani determined to wager 100 full Don bucks, based on the premise that an announcement of the Final Fantasy release date at the concert preceding the Square Enix press conference would result in a payout for the no side of the ledger. Unfortunately, the only payout would be from Mr. Damiani, as he was taken for a ride by Mr. Huber and Bosman. Sound shady?
Sounds shady as hell.
Indeed, Mr. Huber. On the evening of June 9th, 2019, Mr. Michael Damiani, erstwhile trusting ally and Final Fantasy fan, accompanied thousands of fellow JRPG and music lovers to a concert celebrating the history of Final Fantasy VII. Final Fantasy VII, a symphonic reunion. It was this concert that Mr. Bosman had impressed upon him would not count for purposes of the Final Fantasy bet. As the evening drew to a close, fans at the concert were finally treated with what many had been waiting for: new footage from the Final Fantasy VII Remake project, and most importantly, a release date for that project, March 3rd, 2020. Mr. Damiani had won his bet, and in his victory he knew it, taking to Twitter to proclaim, "Bet over." Alas, Mr. Damiani could not conceive of the degeneracy that surrounded him, for his bet was far from over. On the betting results show of June 18th, 2019, exclamation included, many determinations were made by Misters Bosman and Huber, but none more important given the odds at play than the following.
All right, controversy starts now. Will Final Fantasy VII Remake announce a release date? Only 32.6% of our patrons said no. There was a lot of positivity about a release date.
Positivity.
So here's what happened. Damiani wanted in on this action.
Yeah.
He asked me explicitly if it happens outside of the press conference, does it count? And I said no.
Yeah.
And here's what happened. It happened outside of the press conference. It was announced at a concert. And then shortly thereafter, Sony, Square Enix tweeted, here's the release date. Here's that trailer. Here's the release date. The announcement was made.
Which to me is all encompassing of the spirit of E3. So in my mind, tie goes to the dreamers. What do you think, Bosman?
I think I can't talk you out of it. I don't want to penalize people for dreaming is the thing.
Exactly. We want to reward the dreamers.
We have a rule about press conferences.
I know.
And you literally said
I know.
in the thing that it would not count.
You're right.
But here's what happened is the release date was at least announced in their press conference.
That's the thing. If I'm only watching E3 coverage and I'm tuned out of said concert, of said Twitter feeds, because I don't want to get leaked, and I just tune in to that press conference, I'm getting blasted with that release date. It's a tough call.
It's a tough call. I'll tell you straight up what happened, dear audience. I was talking to Huber about it, and he always sways me over. When Huber makes an appeal to my heart, I can't say no. Would you say you wanted to reward positivity or something?
Reward the dreamers.
Reward the dreamers,
Yes.
right. Yes, you wanted to reward the dreamers. Tie goes to the dreamers. So, a Final Fantasy VII Remake release date was in fact announced. Anybody who said yes won Don Bucks for that bet.
Unfortunately, the law gives little regard for contractual breach due to a swayed heart. Tie goes to the dreamers. In one fell swoop, Misters Huber and Bosman, as in the cases of so many sad stories before them, threw away a lifetime of fair dealing and clean living, and in so doing, set a course which would cost them not only their reputations, but, in fact, the very victory they hoped to cement through shady deals at the back door. For where would Mr. Huber turn once all the betting rules had been cut down? The dictionary defines a tie as a state of equality in the result of a contest, as in points scored or votes obtained. It is meant by Mr. Huber to evoke the more well-used American baseball phrase, tie goes to the runner, to refer to a base being granted a runner who contacts said base simultaneous to the ball that would have otherwise put said runner out. Unfortunately, it is fairly ill-suited to describing competing contractual interpretations, as such interpretations generally can't be thought of as perfectly equal. Instead, such circumstances are generally referred to in the law as ambiguities, which occur where two reasonable interpretations of a contract provision can simultaneously exist, with neither being more obviously the correct interpretation over the other. To Mr. Huber's credit, one such rule of contractual interpretation states that ambiguities shall be construed against the drafter. Unfortunately for Mr. Huber, he and Mr. Bosman are best thought of as the drafters of the bets, so to use that rule would do little more than doom his position in its entirety. Furthering the deep mire in which Mr. Huber and Mr. Bosman's interpretation finds itself is the question of whether an ambiguity or tie exists at all in respect of Final Fantasy VII's announcement bet.
Where do you stand, Ian?
I mean, it's a philosophical debate on the nature of the word announced.
Yeah.
Because, like, you just said that it was announced at E3. I would say no, it was shown again at E3.
Yes.
The dictionary defines announce, or announcement as a great many things, but of most pertinence to the present case, it is defined as the act of making something known publicly. Making something known. Can something that is already known be made known again? As was shown on the show, exclamation included, Mr. Bosman has claimed that the release date in question was announced at E3. To the extent the concert activities were included in the broad term E3, he would undoubtedly be correct. But the law will not abide such linguistic sleights of hand. After all, the bet in question was not made in respect of E3, but in respect of the press conferences at E3, of which the concert was no part. But what was known before E3 cannot be made known again. A quick search of coverage of the Square Enix presence at E3 quickly evinces such a reading. GameSpot. Square Enix has officially confirmed the release date for PS4's Final Fantasy VII Remake. The highly anticipated game will finally launch worldwide on March 3rd, 2020. The announcement was made during a Final Fantasy concert held prior to the official opening of E3 2019. Square Enix will also have a press conference ahead of the E3, but the company has chosen to give the much-anticipated remake its own time in the limelight. Its own time in the limelight. Polygon. The release date for Final Fantasy VII Remake was announced by game director Tetsuya Nomura himself at a Final Fantasy concert in Los Angeles. IGN. During a Final Fantasy VII concert in Los Angeles, Square Enix showed a teaser trailer for the FF7 Remake, which announced the release date. On and on and on. The Verge, TechRaptor, Wikipedia, every other site that pops up on an initial search all reference the announcement taking place at the concert and not at the Square Enix press conference. Indeed, to suggest otherwise does violence to the term announcement. With the March 3rd, 2020 release date now known, will any outlet report that Square Enix has announced the release date at the next Sony State of Play, at the Tokyo Game Show, or beyond? Even Michael Huber knows the answer to that. There was no tie here.
To me, it's like whatever rules are set up in the betting special, we have to abide by. And you literally stated that if it was at the concert, it wouldn't count.
I told this to I explicitly explained that to Huber.
Yeah, and so we have to go with that.
Whatever rules we set in the betting special, we have to abide by. If only Mr. Ian Hink had been listened to, why this all could have been avoided. Indeed, the law has a term for the damages caused by one party welching on the promises made during the formation of a contract or other agreement. Detrimental reliance. Imagine for a moment that the Easy Allies were running a registered gambling establishment in the great state of California. That instead of Don Bucks, real American dollars, earned with the blood, sweat, and tears of a man such as Michael Damiani, toiling in the Twitch and YouTube mines day after day, were put on the line. Such an establishment would be subject to all of such states' rules and regulations surrounding gambling, including Regulation 337U, subsection A. It is unlawful for any person to alter or misrepresent the outcome of a gambling game or other event on which wagers lawfully have been made after the outcome is determined, but before it is revealed to the players. To alter or misrepresent after wagers have been made. Why is such an act illegal? because it offends the very conscience of public policy, of the notions of fair play and good faith, of our very concept of justice. Detrimental reliance is the legal concept that if you make promises to me and I take an action based on those promises, if you later rescind that promise, you owe me for what I lost in relying upon you. Would Mr. Damiani have made his bet on no if Mr. Bosman had told him the truth of how such bet would later be determined?
He knows something.
No.
Are you thinking the concert, or are you thinking after E3?
Does the concert count?
It would not count.
Okay, then
concert
that
is not-
concert, baby.
Yeah.
That concert.
To suggest as much is to suggest ignorance, or worse, willful deceit. The existence of Mr. Damiani's question itself is full and complete evidence of his reliance. The House, and by proxy Mr. Huber and Bosman, stole from Mr. Damiani, and worse still, they did it on a basis which calls into question virtually every determination made on their show, exclamation included. Assuming for the sake of argument that there is in existence an ambiguity, or tie, in the interpretation of the Final Fantasy announcement question, and one to be broken by Mr. Huber's heretofore unheard-of rubric of tie goes to the dreamer,
Tie goes to the dreamers.
the immediate question becomes, what is a dreamer?
I don't want to penalize people for dreaming is the thing.
Exactly. We want to reward the dreamers.
We have a rule about press conferences.
I know.
I don't want to penalize people for dreaming. I want to reward the dreamers. No real help there, but it is a noble impulse. But unfortunately one resulting in ambiguity, questions of judgment, and more importantly, chaos. Chaos may be a ladder, but ladders also go down, as Mr. Huber will all too soon find out. What is a dreamer? It seems safe to assume that Messrs. Huber and Bosman mean dreamer to refer to those who see possibility, of announcement, of connection, of greatness, and say, by God, yes, yes, we can believe in that thing. In the case of Final Fantasy VII, it is easy enough to see a vote for yes and say those, good sir, are the dreamers. The people that believed in a release date announcement and said, yes, let's go get that date. But is that a fair assertion? After all, why did Mr. Damiani vote no on the Final Fantasy announcement?
Right now, baby, will Final Fantasy VII Remake announce a release date? Not at E3. No.
Why are they having a press conference?
It'll happen at some other point, not at E3.
Okay. He knows something.
No.
Are you thinking the concert, or are you thinking after E3?
Does the concert count as
It would
E3?
not count.
Okay, then
Concert
that
is not-
concert, baby.
Yeah.
That concert.
Again, not at E3. Not at E3. It will happen at some other point. Does the concert count? And it would not count. Was this not the bet of a man who dreamt of something bigger and better than a mere press conference set aside? Of a game so rapturous and important to the prestige of its publisher that an announcement would be made not as part of some bigger pitch regarding Dragon Quest builders and the latest foray into games as a service through Marvel and the Avengers, but in a celebration of the very game that brought folks together to listen to MIDI clips played over slideshow imagery from 1997. It seems clear that there was no bigger dreamer on that stage than Mr. Michael Damiani, and yet his fate was to have his money stolen from him under the guise of idealistic support. Support for those who had less faith, not more. Those who couldn't quite dream as big as Damiani. And that may be the biggest shame of all. But putting aside the case of Final Fantasy VII Remake, what do Misters Huber and Bosman really mean by dreamer? Is it as simple as being someone who wishes to believe that something can happen in the face of all evidence to the contrary? In such case, is every yes vote a vote for dreaming, and every no vote a cynical addition to the ignobility of man? After all, one need take only a short look at the Easy Allies betting card to understand that the bets are structured on the belief that anything can happen. Will Captain America wear multiple outfits in Square Enix's Avengers? Will a character from Star Wars Episode 4 appear in Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order? Will Mega Man X reveal himself? Will Todd Howard apologize? And will the word Nintendo be spoken during the Xbox press conference? During. Now that's an interesting word, especially if ties go to the Dreamers.
Tie goes to the Dreamers.
The dictionary defines during as throughout the course of duration of a period of time. But as you might have guessed, that's not really the end of the story. Will the word Nintendo be spoken during the Xbox press conference? Does such an utterance require the word to be spoken at the conference, or simply during the Easy Allies coverage of it? Does it require the word to be uttered during the formal stream of the briefing, or does a stream of the closing screen count? What about if the briefing itself were expressly stated to end long after the closing screen had begun to be presented? While the first interpretation might seem the most likely, that the utterance has to take place at the press conference, there is an ambiguity here, at least as significant as the ambiguity surrounding the Final Fantasy VII release date. Given that neither Mr. Huber nor Mr. Bosman are on tape specifically stating that the utterance need be made on the conference floor, one is forced by Mr. Huber's own countenance to resolve any tie in favor of Dreamers.
Tie goes to the Dreamers.
And who are the Dreamers in such a case? Well, the clearest, most obvious answer are that the Dreamers are those that believed. Those that believed in the historic alliance of longtime industry rivals Xbox and Nintendo coming together during the Xbox press conference, and that believed in the possibility of such alliance so strongly that they put their Don Bucks where their mouth was, on the very possibility. Dreamers certainly wouldn't be those that bet against the possibility of such an occurrence. Those like Mr. Michael Huber, a man so cynical and against the possibility of such a dream that he bet the maximum amount allowed that such an utterance would not occur during the conference. But given such ambiguity, and Mr. Huber's self-expressed desire to resolve any such ambiguity against his own position as non-dreamer,
Tie goes to the Dreamers.
it seems only fitting to show the following.
That's it.
Let's do it.
No Nintendo.
I don't know.
Now you may say, the briefing is already over. The fact that Huber said the word Nintendo could not possibly have been what the bet intended. But again, tie goes to the Dreamers. If such a lax legal standard is to be used as a petard, one should expect to be hoisted up on it themselves. The briefing was expressly stated by Microsoft as lasting for 2 hours. Footage on the day even shows Mr. Bosman examining his watch strangely as the formal conference presentation ends, knowing that the briefing itself was to go between the hours of 1 and 3 Pacific time. It and the Easy Allies were continuing to stream footage from Xbox in the form of a closing screen when the utterance was made. Given those facts, there is a clear ambiguity as to whether the conference has in fact concluded when Mr. Huber made his ill-fated utterance of Nintendo, especially given the fact that he would go on to win this betting competition based solely on the absence of such term. But again, such is the nature of tie goes to the dreamer.
Tie goes to the dreamers.
Similarly, other bets can be argued on the very same loose premises. Captain America appears without a mask and without his shield. Is such an appearance different outfits for the purposes of betting? Tie goes to the dreamers. Stormtroopers were very prominent characters in Star Wars Episode 4, participating in many of the most famous scenes in that film. It should give dreamers a new hope, because ties go to the dreamers, and these aren't the bets you're looking for. Mega Man X appeared in cosplay? Tie goes to the dreamers. And is not the addition of NPCs to Fallout 76 greenlit in person by Todd Howard the most express apology he could possibly make? After all, actions speak louder than words, and ties go to the dreamers. There's a reason ties go to the dreamers is not a legal standard, and a reason why it should not be a standard for any type of contract, American dollars, Don bucks, or anything else. A house built on quicksand is no house at all. One could perhaps disregard one misstep, one slip or trip from boys as big as these. But between the rule-breaking, the broken promises, the would-be violations of regulation, the tortured language, the unequal application of even the vaguest and open-ended of standards, can one really disregard them all? The Easy Allies and Mr. Huber and Bosman did a great disservice to the rule of law, the sanctity of wagers, and the friendship of Mr. Michael Damiani when they willfully and maliciously espoused a pseudo-legal interpretive construct that was then applied by them, arbitrarily and capriciously, to no one's benefit but their own. Ties may go to the dreamers, but who'll be left to dream when no one even knows how to play? Hoeg Law is a proud sponsor of Easy Allies and made this video in the pursuit of law, justice, good faith, and fair dealing, and certainly not because of the 1,000+ Don bucks lost due to the Final Fantasy reversal. This video is intended in good fun and is fully tongue-in-cheek. Please don't use the arguments put forth herein for any purpose outside of entertainment. Love and respect.
We're gonna get lit up for that one.